The more I think about it, the more I think this 8-team Pac-12, it just doesn't work.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth: realignment, coaching carousel, the portal, and so much more. We've always got you covered, getting you ready for the season, which inches closer. Today's episode is brought to you by friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We'll talk about whether Missouri has to make the playoff this year, because it might be several years before they can do it again. And was I wrong about something? Maybe. Possibly. We'll discuss that later in today's show. But I kept thinking about the comments from Oregon State Athletic Director Scott Barnes, who I talked about on yesterday's show, because he said that 8 teams keeps the Pac-12 nimble in the realignment space. Well, yeah, you can add more teams, but there is no long-term viability to an 8-team conference on two fronts. Number one, I don't think that's enough teams to ensure that the schools you have in your league aren't going to look elsewhere. Now, that includes Oregon State and Washington State, and perhaps that's what he's thinking. Perhaps he's coming at it from an angle of, we just need to have a league, a conference with a championship to get better access to the playoff so that we can showcase what our programs are. We will outspend everybody because of this Pac-12 war chest that we got in the settlement from the 10 departing schools, and then we'll showcase the Big 12 or the ACC, whoever's available or alive at that time, that, yeah, we should still be around, or we should be in one of the Power 4 conferences in the country. Maybe that's one angle, but I just don't know that you can guarantee the stability you're looking for. How could you even sell the teams you have? Yeah, this is a stable place to be if you have the bare minimum. So it's not a long-term viable option for that. And the second one is about what they're actually seeking to accomplish. And I got a question from one of you on Twitter, which you can always do. I got open direct messages and mentions on Twitter at smclaughlincfb. You can say something nice or mean or something in between, and I will just engage with all of it, or most of it anyway. And one of you asked about, going into Texas to get more exposure out there. And that was the other question that kind of popped into my mind as I pondered this topic more and more. Do they need to have a footprint that goes beyond the West Coast? That's what I've advocated for because of the caliber of brands that are available elsewhere. Schools like Memphis or Tulane, even the football success that they have had recently. And I just look at what you would have in an 8-team league that is all former Mountain West schools plus Oregon State and Washington State. Are you going to get enough people to watch? The question was pertaining to schools like Rice or UTSA or North Texas or Texas State, schools out of the American or Sun Belt that you could go after and try to, build up this group of 5 league. Do you need to be on more television screens consistently than what you have on the West Coast? The argument can pretty easily be made that you do. Because what I have long held and continue to believe that is, if you're going to rebuild this conference and you're going to make realignment moves, you have to have a carrot to dangle in front of schools that you're going to invite. If you just have a 6-team or an 8-team Mountain West or an 8-team Pac-12 with 6 Mountain West teams, I don't know why I can't talk tonight. Anyway, English. If you have an 8-team conference and you're just looking to get a couple schools in Texas just to add, do you think that is going to be a major selling point? Because go back to the stability argument that I mentioned to begin today's show. Would a school like, let's just take UTSA and Rice, for instance, who are in the American Athletic Conference this year, and would get you access or some sort of foothold exposure in the state of Texas for recruiting, television, media, all that sort of stuff? What if you added those 2 schools in addition to Tulane and, say, Memphis came along, and those were the schools that you added? Would you really be able to lure them if you were operating from a standpoint of, we have the bare minimum number of teams? Because the timeline that Scott Barnes is kind of implying here is, yeah, we're going to have 8 teams, and then we're going to read the landscape and read the tea leaves and everything, and then, see what happens there. I think you have to have a splashier move. I think if you're going to bring teams into a new look Pac-12 and try to build a group of 5 conference that means something, you've got to get at least a double digits, if not 12 or 14. Now, does that get more complicated financially? Yes, it absolutely can. But you have to be able to offer schools stability. Because let's say Memphis and Tulane say, no, we're going to stick it out in the American, but you still want to expand your geographic footprint. Would UTSA and Rice, again, this is a hypothetical, would UTSA and Rice decide, yeah, we're going to go ahead and we're going to join this conference that has the minimum number of teams in it? Does that feel like a stable situation? Do they feel like they're upgrading? They'd have to leave the American on pretty darn good terms, which is not a cheap thing to do, by the way. It's very feasible, you can do it. But a lot of schools just left the American to go to the Big 12, where they're getting 30 million plus in media rights per year. And guess what? A new look Pac-12 is not going to draw that. What could they draw? That's something I will definitely be exploring on a show next week. But you'll see why if you tune in as to why it's going to wait for next week a little bit. But I just wonder what sort of position you put yourselves in and what sort of message you're sending to other schools if you're coming at them with, yeah, we have 8 teams right now, we're trying to build it up. I think you have to get to probably 12. I think if you get to 12, like 10 gives you another level of stability, but I think if you get to 12, you can really offer to other schools that might want to join in the future, hey, this is the best place to play. Because the reason, I got a little sidetracked from this, but the reason that you're rebuilding this conference in the first place is so that you have a conference championship and you have access to the playoff. There's no greater tool. Even if Oregon State and Washington States or any other school, San Diego State, Boise, Fresno, whoever, if your long-term play in realignment is to stay at the big boy table, to get into a Power 4 conference, get to the big boy table if you haven't been there before, literally speaking, then you have to be playing in a league that gets you access to the playoff. Because if that sort of realignment in which everything kind of consolidates, and there's a general consensus, I'd say, amongst people that write about and cover this stuff at an even higher level than I do, much higher level than I do, to be frank, that one day everything's going to consolidate and you'll get kind of these just 2 power leagues and everyone will be in the Big Ten or SEC and it'll be AFC, NFC sort of deal. If you want to get included in that, there is no better way to demonstrate your value than the number of playoff appearances you have. So that has to be the highest value for any team looking to get into the Power 4 or one day Power 3 or Power 2, whatever it looks like. And you can't have that without a conference championship. But here's the other drawback of this potential 8-team conference. In what way are you setting yourself up? You're going to play 7 conference games a year? Plus a conference championship game? Sure, you allow an extra week to schedule some high-profile non-conference bouts. I understand that, but that opportunity can be afforded to you if you have a bigger league. If you have a 10-team conference and you can put together an 8 or 9 game conference slate, that inherently is going to be stronger because you're probably going to have an FCS opponent on that schedule already, and you just start crunching the numbers and you run out of opportunities for quality games. But you're competing not against the Power 4, you're competing against the rest of the G5. If you build an 8-team conference, you leave too many good teams and too many good brands out there in the other leagues who can then turn around, win their conference, and outrank you as the highest ranked G5 conference champion to get into the 12-team playoff. So those are the reasons why I just don't feel like an 8-team conference, even for a short amount of time, is particularly viable unless there is some other element, some other plan that I am not privy to, which is possible that Scott Barnes and Washington State have. Scott Barnes is the athletic director at Oregon State. If they talk all the time. If they know something that I don't, all right, good for them. But when I hear 8 teams, I just think those hurdles are too numerous for it to be a viable plan in the short or the long term. I think you have to get more than that as you move forward in this crazy, never-ending world of college realignment. Does Missouri have to make the playoff this year? Yeah, they just might for 2 reasons. We'll talk about that next. Before we talk Tigers, let's talk Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. They've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, All of that, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. You can save up to 60%, which is more than half, off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever you're looking for. You can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. Go check out Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's Locked On College, all one word, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Does Missouri have to make the playoff this year, or can they play at this level for many years? John Miller, Locked On Mizzou, joining me here on the show. Let's start with that question, John. I think it's reasonable, given the past 10 years or so, to describe Missouri as a window program. Some have applied this label to Ole Miss, where, okay, they have a window, they have an opportunity, have to capitalize now, because then next year people are going to leave. Luther Burden will be gone. You won't be able to have those sorts of guys. Do you think this is a window program, or is there going to be an annual playoff expectation the way there is this year for Missouri every year as long as Eli Drinkwitz is in charge?
Well, I think considering how much Missouri is probably losing offensively, Brady Cook, Luther Burden after this season, I think it's fair to say, hey, maybe 2025. It's fair to say, well, Missouri's not going to absolutely expect to contend again for a playoff spot. But at the same time, in the world of the transfer portal, NIL, I think some of the old thinking is kind of out the window in 2024. So I think Missouri, if they capitalize on this season, so to your point, the window is kind of, hey, let's strike while the iron's hot. I think if Missouri has a really good 2024, it can sustain in the future. I really do. Especially you go into the portal, maybe get another quarterback for 2025. Missouri, a really attractive destination potentially in that portal quarterback market.
So when you look at Missouri's roster and the way they have recruited, they've landed some notable recruits over the last couple of cycles. Williams Maneri, for example, comes to mind, a guy that was highly recruited by all the big-time heavy-hitting programs, and then he lands on Missouri. Is that indicative of where you feel like Eli Drinkwitz can take this program? Because you look at the SEC now with Texas and Oklahoma, one of whom is on their schedule this year. That, of course, is Oklahoma. We'll get to their schedule in a moment. But do you think that talent acquisition is going to be sustainable, not just from the portal, but from the high school ranks as well?
Yeah, it seems so right now. Again, I think as long as Eli Drinkwitz is there and continuing to win football games, again, I think that's why 2024 is such a critical year. It's not just about – it's fair for people, especially if you're a traditional blue blood type of college football fan, to think, okay, this is Missouri's opportunity to get into the playoff. That's true, but it's also their opportunity, in my opinion, to continue – this program on a sustainable path.
So when you look at this Missouri schedule, look, I'm not trying to throw shade at the Tigers here, but
Sure.
Gosh, by SEC standards, this is an easy schedule. It is just not every single game is easy, but one of the reasons we're talking about Missouri's playoff window and the playoff capabilities that they have is because this is an 11-win Cotton Bowl champion program from a season ago that knocked off Ohio State to end the year. So they've proven they can play with some pretty big teams. Now, you can say what you want about Ohio State's quarterback situation in that game. There are a lot of years where Missouri doesn't even have that opportunity to play Ohio State on that sort of stage. And they have a couple of tough games at Texas A&M, at Alabama. But gosh almighty, John, the more I look at this schedule, the more I feel. I was talking recently on the show about SEC teams making the playoff. A number of schools are going to be supremely disappointed between Missouri, Tennessee, Ole Miss, LSU, Alabama. Some combination of those teams, Oklahoma, are missing the playoff. They can't all get in. And I think someone's gut instinct could very easily be, well, I mean, Missouri's not. I mean, they never even push for a playoff spot in the fourth. They're not going to do that. But this schedule, John, I think might be the most favorable of any SEC contender out there.
I think that's probably absolutely true. The only thing I would maybe tiny bit quibble with is that I don't think there is such a thing as an easy SEC schedule, but relatively speaking, there's no doubt that this schedule fell very well for Missouri, and probably as well as you could have possibly expected. Again, you're going to Tuscaloosa. That on paper is a hell of a matchup, but the rest of it, I couldn't agree more. It definitely fell Missouri's way, and not only is the schedule favorable, you look at just objectively in the past, returning offensive production, especially at quarterback, receiver, offensive line, that tends to equal more winning, especially that upcoming season.
When I look at these games, the Alabama one stands out, Texas A&M stands out. What do you think is the most important game? Not necessarily the biggest, because the biggest one may very well be Missouri at Alabama. Because if you go into Tuscaloosa and win, well, you saw what that did for Texas a year ago. That comes with a certain cachet, a certain platform when you beat the Tide. I don't care who the head coach is. And by the way, Alabama is going to be contending for a playoff spot this season as well. Their non-conference Power 5 matchup is Boston College. I think they're going to be okay-ish, but Missouri's going to win that football game, barring a dramatic upset from Bill O'Brien and company. When you look at all 12 games on Missouri's schedule, what is the one that is the most important as it pertains to them making the playoff and or contending for the SEC championship game?
Well, first of all, just on that Tuscaloosa game a little bit, if Missouri, just to set the table, if Missouri wins it, my goodness, especially if they're undefeated going into that ball game.
Which is very possible. Very possible.
If they win that ball game, that's as big a win as there's been in the history of the program, quite possibly. I mean, certainly in the last 20, 25 years, I'd really have to think about that hard. The point is, it's even tough for me to put into context how big of a win that would be. On the other hand, Missouri loses it, you kind of just go, all right, that's kind of a game that every single person in the country put down as an L before the season anyway. Let's be honest. So to me, the most important game on the schedule is against the Oklahoma Sooners, not only because that's a good swing game, pretty good traditional rivalry. It's not Oklahoma and Texas. It's not Missouri and Kansas. But, it's a pretty doggone good traditional rivalry at the same time. And in recent years here, it started off when Missouri flipped Luther Burden, who was originally an Oklahoma commit. Now there's been a lot more flipping, a lot more competition. Missouri took offensive lineman Caden Green from Oklahoma out of the portal. You mentioned Williams-Winery. Some people think he was the top player in the entire country. A lot of Oklahoma reporters were staking their reputation on Winery coming to Oklahoma. That did not happen. He's a Missouri Tiger for this upcoming season. So all of that off the field stuff, the recruiting part too, is really interesting too. So to me, all of those factors make the Sooners game. If I was going to pick any game on the schedule I'd like to win, especially in Columbia, I think that would be it.
I like the Oklahoma pick. Allow me to bend your ear
Please.
And pitch the Auburn game.
I love
to you.
it.
Hear me out, because you mentioned that winning that game at Alabama could be among the biggest wins in the history of the program. Now, the first 4 games should all be W's. Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, and Vanderbilt, all at home in Columbia. I think the crowd is going to be treated to 4 consecutive victories to begin the season. Then they go at Texas A&M. That's a go-either-way game. You got a first-year head coach, talented roster, tough environment on the road. Let's say you drop that one, just for the sake of argument here. You play UMass the next week. Poor UMass. Poor UMass.
Poor us. Why did we schedule that game? Why are we going there? Come on. Feel bad for us. Yeah.
I don't think it's a game that you're going to lose is why they're scheduling it.
Yeah.
But then if you have one loss, which should be the maximum amount for Missouri there, you have to win that Auburn game. The Tigers are going to be sneaky tough. They've got a returning quarterback and a returning head coach, which is one of my favorite things on the show. It's one of the reasons I like Missouri. And if you win that Auburn game, the stage for that Alabama game is a lot grander. If you lose the Auburn game and you go into it with 2 losses, I think it's diminished a little bit. What do you think about that?
Well, the Alabama game, correct me if I'm wrong, you have the schedule in front of you. The Alabama game that comes before the Auburn game, correct?
No, Auburn is October 19th, Bama is October 26th.
Okay. All right. Well, in that case, then that's a good point because Missouri does. I'll say this, regardless of what I was thinking there incorrectly, the Tigers have to win 10 games, in my opinion, if they're going to make the college football playoff. And I think that's a entirely reasonable goal for this team right now. Make the 12-team playoff. They got to win 10 games. I think if you get to 9, I just don't see it happening. Again, with the relatively weak SEC schedule, I just don't see it happening. However, 10, I think you're in. I really do.
You at least have a very good chance of doing so. But boy, what a matchup that could be in Tuscaloosa on October 26th. Per the Missouri website, we hope that they are correct on that
I'll
front.
assume they got that one.
Let's hope. Let's hope and pray. SIDs have tough jobs, but let's hope it's not quite that difficult. John Miller, Locked On Mizzou. John, thanks for stopping by.
Thank you very much.
Was I wrong about something? I could have been framing an issue wrong for several weeks on the show. Could. Emphasis on could. That's coming up next. So when I have spoken, as I have regularly in the past, about the group of 5 making the playoff and the prospect of which teams could find themselves, technically, though not in reality, contending for a national championship this year, I have spoken about programs like Tulane in the American, Memphis in the American, maybe South Florida is a dark horse. I think Tulane and Memphis are kind of a two-headed monster there. Boise State in the Mountain West, maybe a Fresno State. You never know what they can pull off, and those have kind of been my top 4. And other teams, maybe UTSA gets their name in there. What could UNLV do after a great season a year ago, and what Barry Odom has had cooking down there? Maybe I've been overlooking the Sun Belt. Maybe I have been. Now, Bill Connolly has got a great piece that, if you are curious, is well worth your time to go over and read at ESPN.com. You have to be an ESPN Plus subscriber, but as you might imagine, I am. So I was checking this out recently, and I thought I'd talk about it on the show because I wondered if I had been wrong to just exclude the Sun Belt. Now, I mentioned James Madison before, but Connolly and S&P Plus believe that the Sun Belt is the best Group of 5 conference in the country this year. Here's why I disagree. I think ESPN's FPI and S&P Plus and all that sort of stuff, they are good, just like any stat. It's a good starting point, not necessarily an end point there. So the Sun Belt's playoff chances are not solely on the shoulders of one team. That is not the case, as is the case with the Mountain West or the American Conference. I can see 2 or 3 teams maybe making a push. Here's my problem with framing this discussion as the Sun Belt is the best Group of 5 conference and the Sun Belt has a chance to get into the playoff. Could they get in there? I'm not saying it is impossible. Their numbers give James Madison about a 13% chance of winning 11 or more games, which is pretty crazy. When you look at some of their biggest brands and some of their best teams, in Connolly's own words, there are a lot of first-year head coaches in there. And boy, that gives me a great deal of pause. There's not just one new head coach in there. There are 3. Major Applewhite at South Alabama. They went into Stillwater and blasted Oklahoma State a year ago. Bob Chesney's coming in to take over James Madison after they lost their head coach this offseason. Louisiana, I don't know if Louisiana can really make it. They don't have a first-year head coach at the very least. Oh, and Troy, who has been a stalwart in this conference for the last several years, yeah, they've got a new head coach as well because of the departure of John Sumrall to Tulane. Now, have they hired coaches that on paper appear capable? Yes, indeed they have. Does it always work out? You need not look outside the Sun Belt and the coaching carousel to know that the answer to that is no, it does not always work out. On paper, Billy Napier just wins. Billy Napier took Louisiana from kind of a bottom dweller. They didn't have any momentum, and suddenly they were good, and suddenly they were winning games. And then he went to Florida, and he might be the next SEC coach fired. Vanderbilt's tough. I don't even know if I want to dive into a Vanderbilt conversation right now. What I do want to talk about are the 3 new head coaches in the conference. It is a tall task. Jamie Chadwell won a conference championship in this very league, by the way, at Coastal Carolina. And then the following year, this past season, won a Conference USA championship at Liberty in Conference USA. And let me tell you, that's an impressive feat. That is an impressive feat, because coming in as a first-year head coach, even if you're not a first-time head coach, which these guys are not, if you are not a first-year head coach, then what you are talking about doing, just walking in to a league where you have established head coaches and just all of a sudden, yeah, no, we just got this. We got this here. Because remember, this is not, for example, a Mike Elko at Texas A&M situation in which he's coming in and taking over a roster that has some talent on it, but they just lost all this talent. Boy, that's going to be really, really difficult to replace. But then you look at the transfer portal class they've brought in and you go, well, they could actually be a pretty talented team. I don't know that you can do that in the Sun Belt quite as easily as you can at some of these higher profile programs. And you also don't have, I think, as strong of cupboards stocked in terms of what is left behind by the previous coach, because a lot of times when these coaches leave for higher profile jobs, they take some key players with them. Now, one of the conference title contenders per Bill Connolly is Appalachian State, which is one of the most just exciting programs in college football. Sometimes, they fall down a little bit, and Connolly lays out very well that they're trying to kind of build themselves back up and get back to being what, we have seen Appalachian State football be before. Not just a team that beat Michigan in one of the most shocking upsets in college football history back in the crazy year that was 2007, but a team that beat top 10 Texas A&M on the road a couple of years ago and had that 120-point combined game with North Carolina or whatever it was, and just some big shootout and such. You've got 3 new head coaches. That feels like an opportunity for Appalachian State, a major opportunity. This is not Sean Clark's first year. It's his 5th. And they've been good. They've had moments. They've had flashes. A lot could rest on what Joey Aguilar is able to do at quarterback this year. That's entirely possible. But that situation alone is something that I can't shake. So, yeah, when I talk about the group of 5 getting a team into the college football playoff, as I regularly do, because I don't want people to forget and then be surprised and look around and go, what? Wait, who's getting into the playoff? There's that team that played that schedule, why are they getting into the playoff? And I'll just look at you and say, hey, if you listen to Locked On College Football, you would know that that's going to be the case. So, if you're a conference title contender in any of the Sun Belt, American, or Mountain West, you are, by default, a college football playoff contender, in spite of the fact that those same teams might be middle-of-the-road programs in several Power 5 conferences. I'm not saying they'd go into other big leagues and be bottom dwellers. I'm just saying, when a conference last year's Group of 5 champion, in the eyes of the College Football Playoff Committee, was Liberty. They played the Pac-12 runners-up in Oregon. It was 42-6. I think that was the final score. It was Oregon had a score in the 40s, and Liberty scored 1 touchdown. And that was it. So, far be it from me to think that this is a great situation for college football to find itself in which you can play, albeit with less money and less overall talent, but in a supremely inferior league and a much less difficult schedule than some other teams, and then find yourself in the playoff because, well, you did really well comparatively. And, well, Appalachian State, they went 10-3, and Florida went 5-5 or 5-7. App State's not as good as Florida. Like, if Florida were in the Sun Belt, the American, or the Mountain West, is anybody putting them down as anything except a conference title contender? I certainly wouldn't. So I don't think I have been grossly out of bounds with my overlooking of the Sun Belt, but I'll say that it's been a mild, what's the right word? I've glossed over it, just minorly. And it should be included because they have teams, they have programs, they have brands, but I think they have more brands and programs than they do teams, because right now I don't know what a lot of those teams look like. I don't know what the Dukes are going to be. I don't know how good Troy's going to be. I know what their program's capable of. That doesn't mean I have a great idea since I haven't seen any on-field product of what the team is capable of. But could a playoff team come out of the Sun Belt? Sure. Right now, I would lean, because of the coaching factor, Memphis and Tulane. Now, Tulane's got to face that same hurdle. John Sumrall, he's got to walk into Tulane, and he's got to take over as a first-year head coach and try to make that sort of push. The reason I have more confidence is I've seen John Sumrall coach at this sort of level and do a remarkably good job. The other guys, not quite as proven yet. Doesn't mean they won't be good. Just means I got to see it before I feel confident in it first. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.